Hello, this is Jay Mitchell, and we are back with another episode of the Libertarian Uncensored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Uncensored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have U.S. Inc.'s bill to force geo-tracking tech for high-end gaming and AI GPUs from tomshardware.com, posted by Tom13. And they added, just shocking that TomCom would propose such a bill. Shocking, I tells you. And yeah, personally, I don't think, the government should be geo-tracking anything, but ultimately, the government has the legal monopoly on the use of force just by enforcing whatever it wants to. And yeah, I personally am against government databases and trackers as a whole, but ultimately, the state can justify whatever it wants to, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Trump lawyers tell Supreme Court that Constitution doesn't apply to the president, from peoplesworld.org, from Donald Key, was by Donald Key, and personally, I don't really care for, Trump and his lawyers, but, a lot of progressives were like, the Supreme Court was inherently, they hated the Supreme Court under Biden's tenure since it got in their way of implementing their agenda. But now that Trump's back in office, they think it's a necessary branch. It's the greatest thing ever since disagreeing with him on occasion. And that just goes to show you, the people don't really have values these days, only teams. Because when it was, even though it's conservative majority, when it got in Biden's way, the Supreme Court was the worst thing ever. But now it's getting in Trump's way, it's the best thing ever. And that just goes to tell you that that these people don't really care about anything other than Orange Man bad, and anyone who gets an Orange Man way is good, and senile man good, anyone who gets in his way is bad. And yeah, it's the same with the Constitution. Back when Biden was in office, they were saying, oh, the Constitution gets in the way of implementing our progressive agenda. But now that Trump's back in office, they say, oh, it's the most sacred, holy document ever, and Trump's not respecting it. And that just goes to show you, they don't really care about anything other than, their side is good, the other side is bad. And that's pretty much all social media is these days. In-group good, out-group bad. And it gets tiring after a while, but people, they just love to circle jerk themselves forever. And yeah, that's why I don't really care for social media. I personally think it's made people lazy, and they don't really do anything anymore other than circle jerk themselves on it. And yeah, that's why I don't think you're ever going to see any massive political civil war or revolution again, because people are too busy jerking themselves off on social media to actually do things in real life. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Trump administration working on plan to move 1 million Palestinians to Libya, from NBCNews.com, posted by LegioX. And yeah, I don't think anyone should be forcibly moved without their consent, but ultimately, as I've said in the past, the state has some legal monopoly on the use of force to justify whatever they want to. And even if you disagree with it, that doesn't mean they can't do it. And yeah, I don't really care for Israel, and I don't really like how up Israel's ass Trump is. This seems like something Netanyahu personally asked him to do. But ultimately, if the U.S. wants to be slaves to whatever the Israeli government says, that's on them. That's why I personally don't really care for, either of the major parties. They're both up Israel's ass and will do whatever Israel tells them to. And yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Supreme Court unanimously rules to reopen Texas civil rights lawsuit, from Newsweek.com, posted by Ninja Lover. And yeah, I guess that's good. That's good. I guess, I personally don't really care for the whole idea of civil rights. I feel like a lot of our rights come from within. They're not granted by the government, and those include civil rights. People think the government's responsible for all rights because the government tells you what your rights are. Well, that's not true. Our rights come from within. And yeah, let's rewrite this case. So let's see. On Thursday, the Supreme Court reinstated a civil rights lawsuit against Texas police officer Roberto Felix Jr., who fatally shot Ashton Barnes during a 2016 traffic stop in Houston. Newsweek reached out to the Fraternal Order of Police Fighting Mom Thursday afternoon for comment. Why it matters? Barnes, a 24-year-old black man, was driving a rental car when Felix pulled him over due to unpaid tolls associated with vehicles. Unaware of the violation, Barnes was attempting to retrieve documentation when the car began to move forward. Felix positioned himself in the car doors, still fired 2 shots, resulting in Barnes' death. So yeah, hopefully the state holds the cop accountable, but I don't know how realistic that is, because the state rarely holds its own accountable, especially if they're members of the in-group rather than the out-group. And yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Trump warns Walmart, don't raise prices due to my tariffs, but do eat the cost from those taxes, from apnews.com, posted by CH4Locks, and that's crosswords from the News of the Stupid subreddit. And yeah, personally, I think if Walmart wants to raise prices, that should be their decision, not that of the president. If he wants to say, don't raise prices, he should be able to. I support freedom of speech. But, sometimes you have to raise prices when it comes to taxes and tariffs, even if, people might not like that. That's why I'm personally against both of those things. I think if people want to pay taxes or tariffs, they should be able to. But they shouldn't be people shouldn't be forced to do anything they don't want to. And even in an extremely consent-based society like our own, people are still forced to pay taxes and tariffs, which are just another kind of tax. Tariffs are essentially just a tax on imported goods. So it just goes to show you how when if I were to come to your house, knock your door, and say, pay me $500, that I'll be arrested and thrown in jail. But when the government does it, it's the law of the land. And that just goes to show you how when the state does something, it's the law. When the individual does something, it's crime. And it's like it's pirates and emperors, as St. Augustine noted. When a pirate does something, it's illegal. But when an empire does something, it's the law. And that's my thoughts on that issue. And we have Oklahoma High School to teach 2020 election conspiracy theories as fact, from TheGuardian.com, posted by Swampyanky Dan. And yeah, personally, I don't really care for that, but ultimately, I think the libertarian position is we just gotta get rid of public schools as a whole, because increasingly they're just pushing agendas on kids, whether they be left-wing agendas or right-wing agendas. And that's why I think I'm personally against very much the idea of the school as a whole. All education is going to be biased to the beliefs of whoever's teaching. So that's why I think increasingly just get rid of the school entirely. Have kids learn them for themselves. Increasingly we have stuff like the internet where you have access to all the world's information. Maybe it'd be easier if you had a teacher to guide you a little, but I personally think the libertarian position is learn for yourself rather than let teachers tell you what to think. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have conservative victimhood culture is ruining America, from CH4Locks, and that's a post from thejoewrote.com. That's the website it's from. And yeah, personally, I think victimhood culture as a whole is ruining America. On Reddit, it's much more progressive victimhood than conservative victimhood, but I do agree, conservatives can play the victim sometimes. But, on Reddit, you see all these people saying, like, oh, someone was mean to me today for being transgender. If it were up to me, they'd be thrown in jail. And yeah, that's just to show you how, everyone will play the victim when it's convenient. And yeah, I personally don't really care for it. I think people need to take personal responsibility, but increasingly, personal responsibility is something that, is almost verboten these days. A conservative will say, oh, someone was mean to me online, arrest them, and then a progressive will pretty much say the same thing as I said earlier, but, they need to take personal responsibility rather than blame all of their problems on external factors, but that seems to be the law of the land these days. No one can take personal responsibility. It's all, the out-group is why I'm suffering, not any of my own, for personal volition. And that just goes to show you that, people will always look for a scapegoat, and, it would be much better if they looked inward rather than outward. But sadly, that's not a society we live in. We live in a society where the in group is good and above question, while the out group is evil and needs to be dealt with as soon as possible. And that just goes, and yeah, that's just the world we live in. Sadly, people, as I always say, people don't have values really anymore. They have teams, and yeah, that's why I think people are tired of all that. They're tired of all this victimhood culture, all this cancel culture. But people are just gonna keep on doing it because it's shown to keep working. So hopefully those things are on the way out. I'm not too hopeful myself. It seems like we're in a never-ending version of 2014 to 2016 when all this stuff first kind of popped up. But yeah, you can only hope things get better, and I'm trying my best, to make that a reality by voicing my thoughts and opinions while I still can. As I've said in the past, these subreddits, despite being branded as uncensored, has censored me for months on end with no one in sight, and they don't see any hypocrisy in that whatsoever. And that just goes to show you that people, they'll say, "Oh, I support freedom of speech," but then they'll ban you if they think you're too offensive or doing a wrong thing. And yeah, I personally could play the victim about that, saying, I'm being censored from Uncensored subreddit and give up this podcast. But that's why I'm never going to give up this podcast, because I'm going to keep voicing my thoughts and opinions as long as I have the ability to. Because it looks like free speech is kind of on its way out. Sadly, with the progressives saying, "Oh, I'm for freedom of speech as long as it's not anything I deem to be hate speech or misinformation," while the conservatives say, "Oh, I'm for freedom of speech as long as it's not anything I deem to be anti-Semitism." Well, in reality, they'll just label anything that goes against their narratives at all as one of those things. And that's my thoughts there. And yeah, I think we're gonna wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.